Members of NADECO here present, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, gentlemen of the press, I bring you greetings on behalf of NADECO and the people of Nigeria. NADECO welcomes you to the first of its series of events planned over the next several weeks regarding the recently held presidential election in Nigeria. For those who are not quite familiar with NADECO, I'll give you a little bit about the group. The National Democratic Coalition, for short, NADECO, is Nigeria's premier and foremost pro-democracy group based here in Washington, D.C. It was initially registered in Nigeria in 1994 by a group of very prominent politicians and pro-democracy campaigners who needed a platform to fight the military regime of the infamous dictator General Sani Abacha after he took power through a military coup in November 1993 and reneged on his promises to hold elections and return Nigeria to democracy, as was its birthright since obtaining freedom from British colonial rule on October 1, 1960. Sorry about that. A broad-based coalition transcending ethnic and religious lines was formed, which later gave birth to NADECO in Nigeria. No sooner had NADECO begun a peaceful resistance against the then military leader, General Sani Abacha, started to assassinate and jail its members. In order to save their lives, several of NADECO members fled into exile to neighboring African countries, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Canada. In 1995, those NADECO members who fled from Nigeria got together and registered a new NADECO in the United States. Since 1995, when NADECO was registered here in the US, it has continued to push for good governance and credible elections in Nigeria. NADECO alleges that the election results pronounced by the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, on February 25 through 26, 2023, are fundamentally at odds with Nigerian election laws and constitute a wholesale disenfranchisement of Nigerian voters caused by the pervasive rot of Nigeria's increasingly kleptocratic political structure. NADECO demands that INEC draw back its curtains to let the full light of truth prove the transparency and veracity of the 2023 electoral process. It is without question that nearly all of the electoral reforms implemented to safeguard the 2023 Nigerian elections have been savaged by INEC and scattered to the winds of tyranny. It is beyond debate that initial investigation into the 2023 Nigerian presidential election discloses that Nigeria's most recent election is the polar opposite of transparency, fairness, and electoral integrity. This election was polluted by blatant bribery and widespread corruption. Even INEC itself has admitted to its abject failures to comply with the requisite transparency laws mandating real-time electronic transmission of election results from the polling units to the public, instead opting to cloak the electronic results in darkness before emerging with a declared rather than proved winner who is presently incapable of being fully embraced by the world. The INEC action clearly constitutes negligence per se and electoral fraud, as it violated the very statutory provisions and guidelines that are designed to protect against the type of fraud caused by its failure to transmit the results in real time. The people of Nigeria are supposed to be the ones the statute is designed to protect. Instead, they have found themselves at the receiving end of the resulting gross injustice. NADECO maintains that the 2023 presidential election is an attempt to disenfranchise the Nigerian people through the four horsemen of democracy's doom: bribery, voter intimidation, insecurity, and vote rigging, all harnessed to skew the results of the 2023 presidential election. NADECO calls upon the people and the judiciary of Nigeria and international community to join hands in a concerted effort toward global condemnation and absolute rejection of the hasty, hollow, and illegitimate result declared by INEC as being contrary to the will of the people and the rule of law. Here are some positions that NADECO has taken. NADECO is gravely concerned about the irregularities, voter intimidation, violence, the breach of the National Electoral Act, and most importantly, the abrupt and hurried pronouncement of the dubious 2023 presidential election results. This, in our viewpoint, signals a whole disenfranchisement of voters in Africa's largest nation. NADECO's goals and singular mandate have always been to fight for the rule of law and democracy in Nigeria as Nigeria's watchdog of democracy. NADECO hereby, as a first step, formally severs its relationship with Senator Bola Ahmed Tinubu as a former founding member of NADECO USA for his participation in the worst electoral fraud in Nigeria's recent history. NADECO and Tinubu fought Abacha as the military dictator who scuttled the will of the Nigerian people in 1993 June 12 elections. Ironically, exactly 30 years later, in 2023, NADECO is fighting the same species of dictatorship, but only this time a much more dangerous civilian dictatorship, a kleptocracy mostly perpetuated by one of those who fought Abacha then. NADECO will not look the other way simply because the fraud was perpetrated by one of its founding members. NADECO urges the Biden administration to withhold any recognition of the product of the flawed elections. NADECO further entreats the U.S. Congress to introduce a resolution calling on the U.S. administration not to recognize the product of the election. It is the product of a poisonous tree. NADECO calls on the international community to support the empaneling of a team of internationally acclaimed technical experts to examine, interrogate, and analyze the INEC servers and beavers and all the other equipments that were used to extract the original votes and information. NADECO implores the Nigerian people and the judiciary of Nigeria, acting in concert with the international community, to join together in a concerted effort toward global condemnation and absolute rejection of the hasty, hollow, and illegitimate results declared by INEC as being contrary to the will of the people and rule of law. NADECO demands that the chairman of Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, must resign or be removed immediately. NADECO urgently requests that all countries worldwide, especially the United States, place an immediate visa ban upon Professor Mahmoud Yakubu. NADECO solemnly exhorts the U.S. to not deviate from its democratic standards in Africa just because it fears competition with China and seeks to curry favor with illegitimate dictators who come to power through bribery, force, intimidation, and vote rigging. The U.S. should come out and condemn the apparent corruption of the electoral process and impose an immediate visa ban on those suspected to have compromised the polls. NADECO demands that President Buhari and INEC Chairman Professor Mahmoud Yakubu should be held jointly and severally liable and accountable by the Nigerian courts and international community for what is currently happening across Nigeria in the days following the 2023 elections and for what would happen in the next few weeks or months should INEC's noxious banquet be forced down Nigeria's throats. These are the positions that NADECO would like to put out there for the international community. People in Nigeria are going to court, but we are appealing to the court of public opinion to see what happened in Nigeria. We're basically challenging the process, because the very law, Electoral Act that was put in place to guide against what happened was broken. So the Nigerian people and international community would like to know why that was the case. Because once that was broken, it means the protection that that Electoral Act provided for Nigerians was gone. Thank you.
Okay, we are going to call on a human rights activist and lawyer who observed the election in Nigeria. He just came back a couple of days ago. He is Emmanuel Ogebe. He is the coordinator of DEMO, a Democratic Election Monitoring Observers. So he's going to come out here to address us. And then after that, we'll call some other person, at the end of which we'll take questions, please. Any questions you have, we'll try to make it brief. Mr. Mano, please.
Good afternoon, gentlemen, and thank you very much for coming out today. As he mentioned, I am with the Diaspora Election Monitoring Observatory, and we were participant observers in the election that just held in Nigeria, or should I clarify, the sham elections that just held in Nigeria. I want to point out that as a participant observer, I traveled to my home state to participate in the elections, and the BVAS technology refused to accredit me, so I experienced disenfranchisement right there and then. I know that at least half a dozen of my family members who voted in 2019 were unable to vote this time because of the cash crunch that occurred in the economy. So there were systematic efforts to disenfranchise and intimidate or strangle voters from being able to participate. But you can imagine my shock after monitoring in Benue, Plateau, and FCT and seeing thousands of Nigerians peacefully coming out to vote, to see that the results were not uploaded. Now, just to show you the extent of the mischief that occurred, the results for the National Assembly elections, which occurred at the same time, simultaneously with the presidential results, were able to be uploaded, but the presidential election results were not uploaded. And till this day, as we speak, the results have not even been completely uploaded. What is even shocking is that we have seen photographs of individuals, a woman in a bathroom, uploaded supposedly as results on INEC's IRF page till this day. How can you elect someone on the basis of the photograph of a woman in the bathroom? I want to quickly mention that a lot of the international observers who were there were as disenchanted as I was. There were 4 African presidents, former presidents, who were in Nigeria to observe the elections. There were over 144,000 observers deployed across the country. And they all were disenchanted by what they saw. I want to say that what happened in Nigeria was not election observation, but a crime watch. We watched a crime being perpetrated on a country of 200 million people with utter and complete impunity. I also want to say that President Jimmy Carter has been vindicated. He went and observed elections in Nigeria many years ago, and he was so upset at the impunity and the brazen theft of the election that he vowed never to go back to Nigeria again. And as that distinguished president is in hospice care, he stands vindicated because Nigeria has refused to learn its lesson. One of the American observers that I spoke with mentioned two things. One, he said that, well, at least this election was better than the 2003 election. And I said to him, if we're going back 20 years to compare, then we have not made any progress. And as NADECO has pointed out, this is even 30 years. The June 12 election, which was a travesty and a brazen rape of democracy or attempted democracy, is basically happening again. The sad point is that one of our co-travelers in the effort to restore democracy to Nigeria is now complicit in undermining democracy in Nigeria. In 1997, when I came on exile myself, after having been imprisoned by General Abacha, I had the privilege of meeting Senator Bola Tinubu in NADECO in exile in the UK. So we have been in the trenches fighting for democracy. And it is painful for us to see what is happening, that we're not making the progress that we think we should make. I want to wrap up my remarks by making a couple of points. That it is not that the elections in Nigeria were handled badly, but that the rigging in Nigeria was handled badly. There was no effort, there was no sincere effort to conduct an election in Nigeria. What happened was an insincere effort to conduct rigging. And that is why you will see cancellations. You will see unbelievable atrocities that were done. They didn't even make a genuine effort to hide the manipulation of the elections. I also want to make this second point, that it isn't that they failed to meet global standards, but that they failed to meet even their own standards. There is no way that INEC can say that the travesty that occurred was what they had promised time and time and again. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say that I join my voice to what NADECO has said today. The INEC chairman needs to resign for once again betraying the trust of the Nigerian people. The United States government should not dignify the travesty that has occurred by legitimizing illegitimate rulers. And most importantly, we must not fail the young Nigerians who came out in droves in the sun and put their fate in their own hands, that they wanted to rescue their country from bad leadership, only to be abused and misused in this manner. So I call upon the government of General Buhari, if he has any dignity and if he has any aspirations to any legacy whatsoever, to salvage Nigeria from the travesty that has occurred in the sham elections that held. Thank you very much.
Okay. Next will be NADECO General Counsel, Bruce.
Thank you very much. I'm Bruce Duvalier, and I am General Counsel for NADECO, and I'm honored to be part of an illustrious group such as NADECO that has a long history of trying to do the right thing and keep democracy safe, restore democracy, and restore the rule of law. And the primary question I think that should be asked, most of the people here in the audience know this, is why should we care about Nigeria? Why should the United States care about Nigeria? Why should the international community care about Nigeria? What would you say if I told you that there was a country that has arguably the world's oldest democracy with full participation of all of its members? What would you say if I told you that there is a country where a group of people has the oldest written constitution featuring guarantees for individual freedom and due process in the world? What would you say if I told you there was a country that featured full participation of women in its political system, both to vote and to govern? And they started doing this when Europe was in the Dark Ages, in the 800s. What would you say if I told you there was a country that is consistently in the top 10 of oil-producing nations since the 1980s? What would you say if I told you this same country has never been openly antagonistic or antagonistic to the United States, has never been an enemy of the United States, in fact, has never been an enemy of the West? What would you say if I told you this very same country has the greatest number of doctors living in the United States of America per capita than any other nation in the world? More than England, more than Russia, more than Germany. What would you say if I told you that 29% of the immigrants from this country over the age of 25 hold a graduate degree, when you compare that to 11% of the population of the United States over the age of 25 holding a graduate degree? This country has almost 3 times more people holding graduate degrees here in the United States, contributing to our economy and our well-being and our security. What would you say if I told you the same country has 45% of the involvement of its people, the immigrants that live here, the diaspora, in education services, and most are professors at top universities? What would you say if I told you the same country I'm talking about they're entering the medical fields and the technological fields in a rapidly expanding rate? They're increasing the U.S. economy. They are entrepreneurs. They are making America better, building tech companies in the United States to help the people back home. Would anybody be able to guess that country was in Africa? Would anybody be able to guess that country is Nigeria? Because it is. That's Nigeria. So when you say, why Nigeria, it is almost a fool's question. One of the greatest nations that has all of these things going for it, and yet we constantly turn our back on Nigeria. Shouldn't we be favoring this nation? Shouldn't we be more attentive to this nation? Shouldn't we treat this nation, this giant of an entire continent, not of a region or an area, of an entire continent that stands out as a shining beacon? Shouldn't we treat them as especially favored allies of the United States and indeed of the West? Especially given the insecurity in the world today with issues relating to extremism and energy shortages. Don't you think that this is a nation that the world should readily leap to the fore to protect, to ensure the well-being so it can continue on its pathway to greatness? Yeah, we're talking about Nigeria, the largest nation in Africa. It is the wealthiest nation in Africa, and yet it's the poorest country in the world. Nigeria now has more people living below the poverty line than any other nation in the world, which is a remarkable feat, given that there are 234 million people in Nigeria and approximately 1.4 billion people in India, the former dubious leader of world's poverty. How can we let that happen? How can we turn our back? How is that possible? Nigeria is also the site of the largest genocidal slaughter the world has seen since World War II. And yet nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to do anything about it. I am here very proud to be involved with NADECO because NADECO wants to do something about that. Something is very, very, very wrong. And it starts with the ability to choose your leaders in full, open, and fair elections. Nigeria has descended into a kleptocracy. And what that means is theft is the coin of the realm. Not due process, not laws, not fundamental fairness, not the pursuit of happiness, not freedom, not family, not religion, not work, not prosperity, but who can steal the most first and go back and steal some more. And that is something that I believe the Nigerian people can solve on their own, but they're going to have the help. We cannot continue to turn our back on Nigeria. The international ramifications or aspects are very clear. Article 25 of the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, which was adopted in 1966, became law and active in 1976, was adopted by the United States in 1992 and by Nigeria, fully adopted, says that every citizen shall have the right and the opportunity, without any of the distinctions mentioned in Article 2 and without unreasonable restrictions, to take part in the conduct of public affairs directly or through freely chosen representatives, and to vote. This treaty signed by Nigeria and by the United States, and by the way, in the United States, when we sign a treaty, it becomes the law of the land with certain restrictions. So the United States has to comply with this. Nigeria has to comply with this international edict. It is as fundamental as any human right. And let me quote the UN, the Covenant 25 says, to vote and to be elected at genuine periodic elections, which shall be by universal and equal suffrage and shall be held by secret ballot, guaranteeing the free expression of the will of the electors. That's why this is important. We have a violation of international law that rises to a violation of human rights, and we all know the human rights violations that follow. And it's by a nation that we should hold in special favor, that we should hold more closely, that we should take better care of. The fact of the matter is that what was supposed to happen, and again, we are not partisan, NADECO is not partisan, but it appears as though the process, and that's what nations, that's what a democracy is. That's the greatness of America, is the process. It's not the people, it's the process. It's not the result, it's the process. How our government works, how our elections work. And the process of this election in the 2023 Nigerian presidential elections appears to be fundamentally flawed. We believe, NADECO believes, that the February 25 to 26, 2023 election, the results, the hasty announcement of the results, are fundamentally at odds with the Nigerian election laws. And as Dr. Ogebi said very clearly, they didn't just violate rules, they violated their own laws. INEC glorified their efforts to make this the cleanest, the purest, the most transparent and fair election in Nigerian history, in African history. And yet, they violated every single fundamental tenet in every single law. They instituted the bimodal voter accreditation system. You've heard about that, the BVAS. All that is, make no mistake about it, there's a lot on the internet that seems to, people want to believe that when you voted with the BVAS, that recorded your vote and your vote was sent somewhere and it went to a server and it was tabulated and somehow Tinubu or the APC were able to hijack that electronic signal. That's not what happened. It was more pernicious than that. It was more old-fashioned than that. All the BVAS does was gave you two modes of identification, both your card, you put your voting card, your PVC in, and it also did your fingerprint and face identification. But it failed. And the reason BVAS was important is so that people couldn't vote more than once. Vote early, vote often. The reason it's important is so people could not vote that had fake cards. And on the issue of the PVC cards, INEC announced, this is INEC themselves, said that there were 87.2 million PVC cards collected. That was out of 93 million registered voters. So approximately 6 million people were registered. They just didn't bother to get their voting card. No one knows why. It just happens. But what's fascinating is, if you consider it true that 87.2 million people had PVC voting cards and could have voted, the declared winner of this election received 8.7 million votes. Now, out of 87 million, the math's not real hard. That means that Mr. Tinubu got 10% of the vote. He will be ruling the wealthiest economy in Africa with a mandate of 10% of the population. That's extraordinary. Something is seriously wrong. Something is seriously wrong. Additionally, we believe that what has to happen and why we're here today, and NADECO is leading the charge, we believe that INEC has to prove itself. It has to prove the results it announced were true and were real. There are 176,600 polling stations. That's a lot of polling stations. INEC's rules required each polling station to collect the votes, count the votes, and they do it the old-fashioned way. They get the paper votes, they count them. They put them in stacks for each of the primary candidates. They were to gather those results, publish the local results, and then transmit the results, and ultimately they would go to Abuja and be certified. Well, what happened was they published some of the results early on, and then they took them down. And so what they have is something that looks a little bit like this, scribbling, when it used to look like this, where it was written. Someone didn't like the results. That's what appears to have happened. Dr. Ogebe observed it happening. So what we have is vote rigging, vote buying, and bribery. So despite INEC's efforts, nothing good happened. And we're back to the same old thing, the same old efforts. So what do we do? What do we do in the United States? What do we do as members of the diaspora? What do we do as international attorneys or international law folks? What do we do to ensure democracy can thrive? That the promise of 1960 can become true again, hopefully. Well, we are asking that INEC throw open the curtains and let the full light of truth come in to prove the transparency and the veracity of the results they've announced. If the results are true, they should be able to prove it. It is absolutely not extraordinary to ask them to prove it. Show me your math. We've all gone to school. Show me your math. You've got a number. Show me how you got to that number. Prove what you did. There can be no debate that the initial investigations indicate that they were savaged. The rules were savaged. The rights of the electorate were savaged. It was polluted by blatant and widespread corruption. As Dr. Lloyd said, the four horsemen of democracy's doom, bribery, intimidation, insecurity, and vote rigging, appeared to trot and run roughshod all over the nation. They were harnessed to skew the results. We, NADECO, call upon the people of Nigeria to act peacefully, but to demand that proof be provided to them, that INEC prove the results they've announced. We also call upon the international community to join together with the Nigerian judiciary in a concerted effort to condemn and set aside the hastily announced results and instead proceed with the solemn seriousness this deserves. Again, one of the world's great nations is at peril here, continues to be at peril here. We need to make sure we don't continue to turn our back on Nigeria. And what we're asking for is very simple. Prove to us. Prove. NADECO says prove to us that if there is a Nigeria and there is a democracy in Nigeria, that it was arrived at lawfully and in accordance with the rule of law. The continuation of power by the ruling party is a wholesale disenfranchisement of Nigeria without more. That is little more than a dictatorship. And it's a new dictatorship. But it is nonetheless a dictatorship because it's imposed apparently against the will of the people. And we believe the will of the people of Nigeria must be preserved, it must be sanctified, and it must be held with the most solemn of regard. This event is designed to lead a global call to action, to address INEC's duplicity, and to make sure that the truth is told, and that what happened is exposed, and the next steps can be taken. And I, for one, I know there was a lot of skepticism. I've appeared in this, well, a few rooms over a few years ago on the Uzodimma issue. I was involved in drafting briefs that were filed there. The Nigerian judiciary cannot always be relied on to do the right thing in elections. But I take a little bit of hope. You've got to be an optimist. You have to be an optimist because your faith in God and your love for your country and your love for your family, you got to be an optimist. The Nigerian judiciary showed us they have the ability to disregard what INEC says and chart their own path toward justice. Now, we may disagree with what they did with Uzodimma. Certainly, Ihedioha disagrees, and my clients did, but they have that ability. So the Nigerian judiciary, there's a small spark of hope. The recent ruling to free Mazi Nnamdi Kanu and to impose a substantial fine of ₦1 billion for his wrongful retention, that gives you hope. I believe the Nigerian judiciary can do the right thing. But if they don't, we also believe that the international community has a burden. It's far too long disregarded the great Nigeria. We cannot turn our back. The will of the people of Nigeria must be preserved. Thank you.